us. Right, so I can do my Alfred Hitchcock impression actually.
I'll start miming the birds floating around.
Once upon a time.
Is that sex? Talking about Nick, just leave it.
Hello?
Yep, that's fine. Cool, right. Are we off? Is that recorded? Yeah, that's fine. We're off. Brilliant, thanks everybody. Thank you very much everyone for coming to our Sitecore user group at Bristol. We haven't had one for a while. We will have to travel all the way to sunny Cardiff if we wanted anything in the southwest, but we're back. And so we've got two talks tonight. First one with Nick, talking about Sitecore and then later on we've got Kieran and John from Sitecore talking about how PowerShell is some kind of programming language. So it's important to them in some way, but we'll believe that when we see it. So, sorry.
Taras is doing it.
Oh, and Taras, what are you doing? You're doing
an extra session about the MVP program.
Brilliant, excellent. So 3 presentations for us tonight, and as you've seen, food and drink in the other room. Just have a few quick breaks in between. If you do know anybody that's coming that isn't here yet, there's a problem with the doors and I have to let people in at the side, so yeah. Or if you need letting out. Just come and talk to me or any of the Sitecore people. It's just because builders have cut through wires and the doors don't work properly, so there's a bit of a song and dance around it. But apart from that, everything should be fine. Toilets are out of here and then sort of round in a sort of horseshoe next to the left of the lifts. I nearly said elevators, I'm not American. But without further ado, we'll get on with Nick.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. The idea behind the talk really was partly Mike needed someone to sponsor it, and therefore someone to talk from our company. So that's some of the background. The original topic was we were going to do a pitch a few weeks ago for a random client. So we thought, what could we do in 2 weeks? What could we essentially demo to them to sell them Sitecore to show how good CLI'S were and all this sort of stuff. So we thought this was pretty cool. We could start to use some of the Azure stuff that's out there, some web forms, and we wouldn't really have to do much dev work. We could just configure it. So that was great. We went to the portal, to the Azure portal. If anyone's not seen this, that's kind of a subset of it. And you go through this little wizard and you configure what you want. So you want Sitecore version, I don't know what we picked, version 5 I think, 8.2.5. We picked web forms, fill in some configuration, press go, and I think probably about a month ago this was great and it worked fine. We got to doing this about a week ago in preparation for this, and a little prompt came up saying your talk now needs to do something different. Think of a different topic at the last minute, unfortunately. So apologies, it's not going to be on Azure and it's not going to be on web form. So if anyone was really into that idea, then some of the clues on this desk might give away maybe what it's going to be around. So you can make up your own minds. I thought I'd come up with a sort of term around that will feed into the next slide. So it is Azureless and it's also web formsless. So I do apologise. It wasn't meant to be that way. So what we're going to talk about instead, something that maybe talked around in slightly different terms. Serverless is a word that you hear bandied about quite a lot, especially as you start to deal with the cloud a lot more. So Amazon have got their own flavour, Azure have got their own flavour. There's all sorts of other providers. So yeah, it's something that you'll start to see a lot more. And I'll explain kind of what that means if people don't really know, don't know what it is. It sounds a bit like a sort of wild beast, this, doesn't it? The serverless functions and headless Sitecore. Is it going to come and get you around the corner, out the back of the office if you don't go through the front door? The headless Sitecore bit is not that new a sort of concept, but you hear it bandied around quite a lot. Ultimately, using Sitecore as a CMS, getting content, but not necessarily without the presentation layer. So what does that look like? This little chap is going to come into play, so we'll have a look at Alexa, how that can get some content from Sitecore. Now, I'm aware that someone else did a talk very similar to this quite recently. I don't want to kind of copy exactly what that was. Hopefully, some of the ideas we'll see won't just be specific to Alexa. They'll be more around how you can start to personalize content in this headless environment, how you can send data off to different places based off knowing probably who the person is or what the device is, and how often they're using it, what they're looking at, and all that kind of thing. So hopefully it's a bit different. We've got one at work. So the idea and how I got into this, Alexas were on sale pretty cheap. So they were on Prime Day, they were half price. So that was the first thing. Secondly, you could write your function in C#. So that was sounded like quite a good fun thing to try. Thirdly, we make a FRT round at work, and it should be a random spin the wheel. So why not get Alexa to do that for us? It seemed like quite a good, fair way of distributing out the who has to make the tea. You'll probably see EasyT referred to quite a lot in this talk because I've sort of stolen the code base for it a little bit. We do work for EasyJet, and it chooses who makes tea. That is the only link there. So hopefully it will make sense as we go through. So getting started with this sort of stuff, there's a few things you need. You need an Amazon account, which I suspect if anyone has bought stuff off Amazon, you'll have one of those. You need an AWS account. If you're hosting stuff in the Lambda function, then you need an AWS account. If not, then you can host it anywhere, but it makes life a bit simpler if you've got an AWS account. You then need to actually use the stuff, a device, so for example one of these Echoes or a Dot or one of the little handheld sort of, TV remotes you can get. And then to make it a bit more interesting and kind of bring the context of it more relevant to what we're going to talk about today, you need Sitecore out there, somewhere in the wild. Now, I say it needs to be public facing. You can host things so that it doesn't necessarily have to be. So you could run your Sitecore instance in a VPC, essentially meaning that you're ring fencing who can get to it and what can talk to it. You could set up your Lambda to be in the same VPC and the two can talk to each other, and it doesn't have to be out on the internet. But it's kind of up to you. The follow-up to that, I think, the translatable bit of it, or the personalization piece of this, that's the only thing that would benefit from Sitecore. You can do all this you can get Alexa functions working pretty simply without too much code. So this sort of serverless cloud function concept is quite a neat idea. It gives you the ability to run essentially little small units of work in a very, very scalable environment. You don't really have to worry about particularly how it's hosted, maybe where it's hosted, what it's hosted on, almost what language it's running in. So essentially you've got these functions that you can run on demand. So in for example, AWS, you could run them on a schedule. So for example, every day at 5 p.m. you run a function to go and check something exists or something doesn't exist. Something's in a bucket, something's backed up right. You could tie it into the API gateway concept that exists in Amazon. So HTTP requests come in, they get fired off at your Lambda functions. It takes information from that, so probably things around the path or what you're posting to it. It then concocts the response, and that gets sent back to the client. So that's kind of another use. It might be that you upload files into buckets. So when a new file lands in S3, you might want to copy it somewhere else. So that can that sort of timeline of events can all trigger cloud functions. And final one, Alexa skill requests. So you say something to Alexa, it then triggers a Lambda function, and you get back information. I have had to turn it off at the moment. That's why it's red. So it's broken. There was quite an interesting South Park where they trolled them. They started blasting out these messages about Alexa go off and do stuff and Google Home go off and do stuff. So that's quite a fun one. The other interesting one I saw is there's frequencies that a human ear can't actually hear. So people found that they could send requests at them at these frequencies above what humans could hear. Alexa would detect it, manage to know what it was meant to do, and would go off and load naughty sites and do all sorts of things behind the scenes. But yeah, don't worry. The red is just its off at the moment. So we're not listening to you all. This thing's listening to us all, unfortunately. But so they're pretty easy to set up. The few things you need to do. First is log into the developer portal, go and create your skill, set up a few parameters. So things like what you want to call it, which is basically what it will show up as in the store if you download it, and then something like the invocation name. The interesting thing about the invocation name, that's what will get triggered, or sorry, that's what you have to say in order to make the skill start. So Alexa open the T round would be the invocation name. And then in theory, that's going to load up your Lambda function. That'll be running in a container behind the scenes that Amazon's managing for you. So sometimes if it's going from a cold start, it does take a little while to spin up, but I mean after that it's going to be fast as anything. You then set up things like intents and slots and synonyms. Pretty similar concept to if you were doing stuff like in a chatbot. You have intents, which are kind of what you're wanting to convey, and slots are kind of extra bits of information you can pass through. And then finally you link it to an endpoint. It doesn't have to be a Lambda function, it can be an HTTP endpoint somewhere, but it does a lot of the dirty work for you if it's done through a Lambda function. So you need to work out what happens. So when you say something to your Alexa or Google Home, whatever that might be, it will handle all of that text conversion into what it refers to as intents. So hopefully, I can't really see this example that well, unfortunately, sorry about that, but we can see the name of it, that it's called the add intent, and we can see, hopefully here, there's a little blue box that's got something that looks a bit more like this, and that says add and then person. So for example, if we were to say to the T round, right, I want to add Mike in, then ultimately Alexa would know to run or send information around the fact we've chosen the add intent, and it would pick the slot, would have a value of Mike, because that's how we set things up. You can provide pre-canned or sort of examples for it to learn from for the slots. What I found from doing that is you tend to need to give it quite a good broad range of things. So if you just went in and put 2 humans' names in as the examples, chances are it's not going to get a pretty diverse view of the world from that. So you need to kind of give it a bit more information if you can. For one, I found by putting about 1,000 in, that gave a really good coverage and stuff, but that's down to you how you want to use it. Now I think, based on the fact that people have come to this Sitecore group, the concept of a web request and response is quite a common scenario. That's something that I'm hoping most people kind of understand. You get the same concept within the Alexa world. This screenshot we can see is their test app. So this is really useful to avoid having to constantly talk to it and see the problems that you might be having. You can do it through a web interface. So that's a quick way to sort of debug these things. You get things like a request. So the request contains which intent's been called, what the Alexa's ID is, which is this user ID that it talks about, and then this concept of session. So a bit like you have in web, you've got session, you can store data in it that will get sent to and fro as you make these requests. Ultimately, you have the same concept here. Now, that's all good. That's the data going from Alexa to the Lambda, and then coming back, you've got the response. So that has things like what the text is going to be that will get read out. It'll have whether it's the last intent that you want to call, so whether to close the session, and then also if you've updated the session data, any information there. If this is something that strikes a chord, I would say have a look at this guy's library. It handles ultimately all the serialization of all of these data structures that we can see here, and you don't have to worry about doing any of that stuff because it's kind of boilerplate code really. Life kind of gets even easier than that, I think, if you're wanting to do this from scratch, because Amazon themselves have released a toolkit, so you can, in Visual Studio, choose right-click, add a new Lambda function, press go, and you end up with some C# code. There's nothing hugely rocket science about it. You've got, like you would have in any code, you've got namespace, class, and then function name. And that information is what the Lambda will understand, and that's why it gets run when you deploy it up to the up into the cloud. You can do them in Node, you can do them in Python, or .NET Core 1.0. There are quite a few support tickets asking when newer versions of .NET Core will be available, but yeah, at the moment it's 1.0. Ultimately, you're writing code on your machine. So how do you get that up into the cloud? It's remarkably simple actually. You can manually basically take a zip of your bin folder and just upload it. It's one option. You can use the Visual Studio toolkit, so you can right click on your function and say deploy. you can use one of the APIs or CLI'S that Amazon provides. So that could be PowerShell, it could be C#. You could do it in JavaScript. You could find many ways to do it. There's another toolkit that you can use. Now, one problem I've hit when doing this is if you bring in versions of libraries that are different .NET Core versions or refer to things in slightly different ways, so maybe start to bring into the standard level of things, the problem that you hit is Lambda doesn't understand, or the framework that runs these in Lambda doesn't understand it. So if you're finding it either won't deploy or it deploys and it doesn't work, I would say just check your references, because that's probably quite a good point to verify.
Just mute
that. We use these sorts of things out in the wild quite a lot. So the whole sort of serverless idea is you're not running it particularly on kit that you own. It just runs somewhere up in the cloud, and that just happens to be for Amazon up on containers they spin up for you. The sorts of things we use this for EasyJet. We check backups exist. We kill off user keys from our production accounts if they are sort of older than, say, a day or two old. We check imports have landed. We send messages to Slack. We start and stop environments. You can do all sorts of things. Some of these based off a trigger, so off a time-based thing. Some of them are based off a kind of event. So sending messages to Slack wouldn't be very good if it was, wow, it's 5 p.m. the next day. You can probably guess how that one's going to go. It can be based off other events happening. So that's notification systems or SNS in the Amazon world and that kind of thing. The starting and stopping environments, we actually do that based off a web page we expose. So users can choose when they want to fire up QA, for example, and that pings off to Lambda and does its stuff behind the scenes, and then sends back the fact it's done it. We touched on this before. There is a cold startup cost, because ultimately, serverless, it has to run on something. It isn't magic. It's not like this up in the cloud and somewhere up there it's doing these amazing things that you don't know about. It is running on some kit somewhere, but this is something that Amazon manage. They handle this for you. You might find that you need to either interact with APIs or you want to persist data, which I guess could be quite a common scenario, that you want to save things that users say to your Alexa. In the T-round example, I need to save who we want to bring into the round, so you don't have to configure your team every single time. We can push it up to the internet, or to the cloud, essentially. You get a user ID, which we'll have a look at one in a minute. It's pretty gobbledygook. It's not something you would choose to remember, but it's going to be unique. It's going to be unique per account. So for my Amazon account I've got, this user ID will be specific to me. So this is really good. We can use it as a key in our databases, or if we're starting to talk to something like Sitecore, we can use it as our identifier. So when we call tracker.current.identify or .session.identify, we can pass this user ID in, and that's going to be the thing that guarantees that this chap is the same one every single time that we're referring to in XDB. Dynamo's really good choice, I think, for this if you're dealing with AWS stuff. We use it a lot for EasyJet. All of the session when you're buying things through the checkout is all held in Dynamo as you're going through. That would be my go-to choice if I had the freedom to pick anything. So yeah, as part of sort of playing with this whole sort of concept of Alexa and having a go at making these functions, it felt like there was quite a few common things that you needed to do, that every single function you write are going to go through the same steps. So that might be interpreting the fact that someone said, I want to run the add intent, and go off and execute some code. It might be maintaining the session, so persisting the fact that certain operations have run in a certain order, and we'll see why that's important in a sec. Might be making sure that responses have a context and that kind of thing. Even unit testing it, how you can run this stuff without really needing the cloud there up and running. So there is a library, if anyone was so interested in having a look, aka the shameless self-promotion caveat at the very top there. It's at the bottom. So if anyone is interested in this sort of stuff and wants to have a play, it's on GitHub, it's on NuGet. It's up to you guys, really. if you want to do some slightly cleverer things, so you might want to send information to Trello, or you might want to get hooked up with Uber or anything like that, then you need to link your skill. And that's your way of saying, I authenticate this external system with my Amazon account, essentially. If you do that, you need to provide a custom URL that will sort of bridge that information for you. It doesn't take much code, it's pretty simple to do. Yeah, it's just worth being aware that it exists. You can create your test skills, so you can unit test them like we touched on before. You can actually set them up within your account and see them and use them without actually having to publish them to the skills store properly. The little green icon here shows hopefully the fact that this is a little test one. That's what you look out for. You can get Chuck Norris facts as well. That's quite a good one. Yeah. There are some real crap ones, I promise, but there are some quite good ones as well. Now, when someone's interacting with it, you've got the concept of like different types of feedback, essentially. Are you going to play audio? Are you going to send back just text? Are you going to send back cards? And cards kind of show up in the app when you run them. Yeah, it's up to you, really. Now, does anyone get the reference for this film? Let's see if maybe a generational thing, I don't know. So within the Alexa portal, you set up intent. So an intent in this example is, we're going to call it yes, and we'll say, these are the two terms that, if you say them, will trigger this sort of stuff. Now that's all well and good, but there probably are other questions we could ask of Alexa that we would want to know yes or no to. This isn't necessarily just a problem for Alexa. This is a pretty common problem in chatbots, I imagine, in anything where there's this mapping of intent to kind of commands in a way. So let's consider saying yes to a slightly different question. Again, hopefully the relevance of the film people might get it. Yes, answering would you like to play a game, and the outcome of that has got a very, very different outcome to what happens if we say yes, following on from this question. So you need to know ultimately what's happened before you for that context to exist. So the way that you can choose to model that sort of thing, and at least the way that if you were to look at the library that I've put together models that sort of thing, is you just build up a queue. You remember the last few things that have happened or the last set of intents that have been run, and you just work your way back up. And you say, what's the previous one? Is it a certain type of question? And therefore you can act upon it. Like I said, chatbots will have the same problem. That's not an Alexa issue. That's just an interesting challenge that you'll hit when doing this sort of thing. So we've talked about getting text back. That's a simple bit of this. So it's very, very easy. From your C# code, you can, unfortunately, the black isn't great. I'll change that next time. But you can see we've got this same return, and then we just plonk in a string, right, saying it's tea time, and these are the people we know that are in the tea round. And that's it. That's all you need to do for your C# function to get a Lambda, to get an Alexa skill to work. How about if we want to make that a bit more interesting, though? That's where things start to become a lot cleverer, and finally we're actually getting onto the bit about Sitecore here, people saying. Here we go. So we see that someone has started asking it for help quite a lot. Therefore, can we infer from that the fact that maybe they're struggling somehow with your app? They're not really getting the gist of how things are working. So that sounds pretty familiar to kind of Sitecore interactions or page events. Someone might tell Alexa that they're impatient somehow. Now, I guess that feels a bit like a goal or a campaign. I suppose impatience, to a certain extent, makes you think of negativity, but campaigns you might want to think of a bit more positive thing, but ultimately the outcome of that is kind of can lead to the same place. You might find someone has actually used a lot of your skill, and in that scenario they accrue a certain score in various different pages or different kind of bits of the app, and from that you reward them. So rather than personalizing a web page and saying here are these panels showing different content based off the fact that we know you've got a certain score, ultimately we can see that boils down to some text that we're dealing with. Alright, so there has been a lack of GIFs. I apologise about that. Boo! Well, here you go. Here's one to hopefully keep you interested. And let's have a look at what some of this actually means. Okay. So first up, I will show you. I will not show you. I will have to put the hold up. Right, we'll have to do this slightly more awkwardly. So let's make this a wee bit bigger. So none of this, I'm hoping, is particularly new or misunderstood by anyone here. We've got items which we think of essentially as pages, and they have a bit of text associated to them. And I didn't actually intentionally pick the skull to refer to the headless thing, but I realised it was quite a good coincidence, so I thought I'd point that out. If we think of really what we need to know at the point we're running these things is we need to know which intent was called. So ultimately, here we go, we've got the help intent, and then what's some text that we're going to bring back. So we can say, right, we can either configure our team, spin the T wheel, or check who won the last round. So that's kind of one piece of the puzzle. If we were to view this in a browser, then hopefully if we have a look at, here's one we made earlier, just a sec. Then what we can see here is, yeah, it's doing what we think. It's saying the intent name is what we want, and then we can either configure it, spin the wheel, or do whatever we want. Behind the scenes, this is getting inferred as being a page by Sitecore because we've got the fact that somewhere in here, and I don't know quite how you make this bar bigger, I'm afraid, but that says help intent. So that's Sitecore is knowing how to resolve the item based off the URL. We're just forcing it to our JSON device, just do a custom one, and finally we're plonking the user ID into the query string. Now, the interesting bit here, or the slight challenge I found, and this is where I was actually going to see if anyone knew a better way of doing this, because this is probably the best group of people to ask than some of the other people I found, is where is the best place if you're serving up a JSON page to essentially take the user ID you've got in the query string and identify them. And it can be answered on a postcard. It doesn't have to be now, but I'd be interested to see how other people are solving this. I found the best way for me to do it was where I'm forcing the response type to be essentially text and JavaScript, and where I've got my placeholder, so this is kind of my layout, to get the query string and identify them. There may be better ways of doing this, but this kind of works. And took a bit of crowbarring, and doing it in the HTTP request pipeline doesn't work because the tracker.session.current is null at that point. So yeah, that's one problem I hit. Probably interesting to point out. So now let's just refresh this chap, and pow, there we go. This person didn't really get the gist of how help should work, and we've shown a different message. Now, it is not rocket science, but it's starting to do some clever things with Sitecore, because what we're saying is we're running some rules behind the scenes. So now if we flip back to, if we flip back here and have a look, have a look at the help intent and see what we've got configured, then in this chap, on this chap, then you can see we've got certain rules in place where the help event, page event has been triggered 3 times during the last 3 hours. Now this was a custom bit of custom code I had to put in. There were some that were quite similar. I couldn't find one that did exactly what I wanted for this, so it was relatively easy to find a sort of working one and copy how it's been done and clone it out. My original idea was to do it based off pages.interactions or the tracker's interactions. It didn't seem to quite get on with pulling previous ones in. So again, if anyone knows why that is the case, answers on a postcard, or let me know afterwards. That'd be cool to know. But there's very much the same concept held, that you want to see if someone's done a certain thing a few times in a certain amount of time, or it doesn't even have to be in an amount of time. therefore you start to show them better or more useful information. You could be a bit cruder, and you could kind of troll people, I guess, and say if it's Saturday or Sunday, then you go off and tell them a different message. But yeah, that's just one of the interesting bits of it. So now if we have a look at what needs setting up within the actual Alexa portal. So if we find our T-round one, you don't have to do a huge amount, like we touched on before. You've got the name and what you'll call it. Now where the interaction builder comes into play is where you start to configure the fact that when you say add and then a name, what happens? That's mapping to this add intent. And then if we have a look in code, what that looks like, it's slightly easier if it was Facebooks. You can see then you basically need to return some text. So, okay, here we go. We've just added the person that came in into the list or whatever it may be. So hopefully it kind of makes sense how these pieces of the puzzle glue together. What's quite nice and will save you quite a lot of time, then rather than having to talk to this all the time, is to actually use the little test app. So now if we come in here and say, give me some help, then you can see we've not asked for help for a wee bit. And then if we do it a couple more times, what we should finally see is, there we go. You can see we've got the slightly more verbose message. And ultimately, if we fire this up in a sec, which I will do, we should hear this thing saying it's beast rather than the sort of basic message that we had. There's a few challenges about how to actually make these requests do their thing. So if we think of how a web page works, so let's just get this chat back, and we'll do it in a incognito. Now this has got the same query string as we had before, so I'll promise that's the thing. So if we do our little refresh a few times, we can get to that point. Now Sitecore is somewhere going to be pushing out some cookies for this. Now let's see what these look like. So it's got your session ID, and then it's got the analytics global cookie. This is the bit that kind of glues you to your record in NetDB, and then obviously your ASP.NET session is your ASP.NET session. Alexa skills or functions ultimately don't have this concept of requests in series that maintain cookies. So one thing I needed to be careful to do was to actually ensure that the session cookie gets persisted. So you can see this rather catchy looking bit of JSON here is going to say, well, because you had this session ID from previously, this is the one we will persist for the subsequent calls we make, to kind of fake the fact that the browser does that for you when you're dealing with this sort of thing. We could totally remove Alexa from the mix here and imagine we go back to the whole serverless thing. You'd have this same problem, that you're making requests into the system, so you're making requests into Sitecore. It needs these two things to be able to persist the information for you and link the stuff together, and from that you should find it all does its thing for you. So what I'm hoping we can see in a sec is if we come back now to this chap and we ask for help. So resetting it's going to clear out all the session. Let's see, did we get, there we go. So it was able to identify me because I passed the same user ID in, which is this rather catchy chap here. I won't even show you because it's absolute garbage. That's getting sent into AWS, into the Lambda function. And if you're really trying to debug what's going on with them, then CloudWatch will be your friend. This is a really useful way of seeing what's happening behind the scenes. And hopefully somewhere in here we can see, let's just make this a bit bigger. This is the user ID, so that's kind of why I didn't bother showing it before, because it's absolute garbage. But ultimately, this is where it's getting the data. We do a bit of stuff around the cookies, and we get back personalized content. And finally, let's see what happens if we call. So this will be the last bit. It is where the demo will actually bring this into play. It will go wrong, so bear with us. I apologise. Let's see. So let's fire up our demo one. So it's as simple as, with a little bit of code, we can say, right, return tail, so this is now expecting a string here. Let's just go off and get this text from wherever it may be. So this is going to be Sitecore, and what we'll return if we can't find it within a little timeout. Obviously, you don't want this thing to hang too much because people are talking to it and expecting a timely response. So at the moment, we're seeing that we've got default text coming back, as we'd expect. So let's go and see how we get on with this. See what happens. Oh, Bristol user group. Now, what are people's confidence levels like?
The original publishing.
Yeah, original publishing is pretty light. Sorry, Mike, it's not using all your best handiwork. This is. Let's have a look. In fact, let's not do it with the test app. Let's go full throttle into this. So, does anyone want to be the test dummy, or shall I do it? Okay, right, we'll have to. So, right, Alexa, open the T round. Let's have a look.
It's tea time. In the round is Nick, Kat and Jasper.
Demo.
Welcome to Bristol user group.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Exit. Woo! And let's try and do something even fancier, and then I promise we'll call it a day, because let's try and personalize it a little bit. So let's say demo intent, which doesn't matter what we call it, and what should we have it say? Let's get personal. Let's get personal. One thing I did find is Alexa won't swear at you. It bleeps out quite a lot of rude words, unfortunately. So, yeah, that was a shame. There goes my idea for swear bot, which I'm sure everyone else on the planet probably had as well. But so let's go in here and we can personalise this. So, shall we say it's based off something clever, or should we just do it off the fact it's a Wednesday? Let's do it off the fact it's a Wednesday, because that's a bit simpler. Date. That might sound like I'm bottling it, but it kind of is. So where the current day is a Wednesday, then it is running on a rather little poxy boxes. So this isn't a failing of Sitecore. This is the this is running in the no. Okay, and let's okay to all of that. Okay. Alright, so finally let's publish. Oh, good job. We have a. That would have been embarrassing, wouldn't it? Would have. Well, it is a demo. It would have. Oh yes, well remembered spot. And I probably should have given it a different name because it'll look exactly the same in there. So do not follow this from terms of editor advice or approaches to doing things. This is demo only. Okay, good spot. Thank you. That would have been a bit of a pain in the bum. So let's try again. Alexa, open the T round.
It's tea time. In the round is Nick, Kat and Jasper.
Demo.
Let's get personal.
There we go. So we're running our. So that kind of hopefully proved it was.
You can only reset after requesting to configure.
Whoa. Let's. We'll leave it at that. Alexa, exit. Stop listening.
Sounds like you could do with a bit
Oh.
Sounds like we need some help.
That does sound like we need some help. It does sound like we need some help. Abort. Right. So.
Only reset after requesting to configure the
Hold up. This will solve that problem. Okay. It's been recorded, isn't it? No. Yeah, any questions? And thanks for listening. Sorry it wasn't what it was supposed to be, but yeah, things were slightly out of my hands.
So, you can add people into the T round. How does it deal with duplicates? Can you add the same person more than once?
Yes! Yes, you can. Because we've got 2 Martins on our team. So yeah, that's... Unfortunately, I think if you remove them, it might nuke both of them. But don't tell them that. That's a feature. But it's easy to switch. That's what it's doing behind the scenes. It's storing the list in Dynamo. So you can... Yeah, how you manipulate that is down to you, really. So.
Nick, one question very basic. So you are trying to publish the whole site, wherever it's creating this.
Yeah.
Is this something you can publish a single item, right?
So if I wanted to only publish this item
Yeah.
to achieve the fact that this one existed as well, or had changes on it, is that the...
Yeah. So you define a personalization rule, and every time you publish the whole site. So what I'm asking is, can we only publish that particular item? Is there any dependency?
Yeah, you could. I was being a bit lazy. I could have published just this item and this one. Publishing site was quicker than doing both, so yeah, it wasn't. It's not doing anything clever behind the scenes. It's.
I was thinking like publishing website has a lot of.
No, it's. I mean, it. Hopefully, if we think of it in its this sort of slightly crude form here, you can see it's basically you're dealing with JSON, so it's just think of it like a web page. One final thing, I promise this will be the last bit that you can then see is actually what people have been doing for their specific skill. So in theory, in here we can see that we can probably guess this person kind of sucks at using our Alexa because they need a lot of help getting this thing working, or I was testing it. But it hopefully proves the point that you can start to see what people are doing very much in the way that you would in normal web pages through lambdas. So I thought that was quite cool.
So
Right.
the skill is a lambda.
Yeah.
Is that always the case with the skills, or can they be? Is there another way to publish skills?
You've got a couple options. When you choose to configure it, you can either say that the service that it ultimately has to call into. So this, what we're seeing here is kind of the configuration of the skill, and then the lambda behind the scenes is ultimately the bit of code that's running. It can be an HTTPS endpoint. It doesn't have to be a lambda, but it's just a lot simpler if it is, because you don't have to worry about any hosting or anything like that.
Okay. So it's basically just it's an endpoint, and then it's kind of just set up to spit backwards twice, right?
Yeah. And so your code is the thing that would fork to say, right, I see that you've asked for help, therefore run this bit of code. I see you asked for add, go off and do this other bit of code, and then you sort of build out that view of the world.
What happens if your Sitecore items are multilingual? Is it easy then to wire Alexa up to be multilingual?
So you'd have, I was thinking about how you do this. You get the ability to configure 3 languages. When you set these up, English, UK, German and US, at least with this current setup. So that's the language that Alexa will understand when you talk to it. You could then very easily say, what language do you want? Store that in the session and then pass that parameter through to the request you're making. And then you could bolt on sc_lang and deal with it that way. And then fallback would work, and anything like that would in theory do its thing. I haven't tried particularly doing it, but conceptually it feels like it suits. So, yeah.
I'm surprised that there's only 3 languages supported with that. For something so big.
If you ask for an aluminum
But what happens if you ask for pants?
Well, that's the risk.
So you get English UK pants.
That's the risk that you have to take. I'm not gonna. I've unplugged it now because it'll start.
Experiment on your own time.
Yeah, that's it. That'll be one for a dark room. No, I mean. So yeah, I don't know. I'm afraid.
whenever you want to have a conversation kind of thing.
Yeah.
Have you tested in a multiple hierarchical kind of question answer kind of mode?
Yeah.
You ask something Alexa gives two or three options, and then based on one option,
Goes down other routes and things.
yeah.
So the way I've chosen to at least try and model that in the code I've done is when you specify that question, you then specify what possible answers would be. So for example, in the would you like to play a game, the two options would be yes or no. If you give a different answer, it will say I only expect yes or no. If you say yes or no when that question hasn't been asked before, it can refer you back to the help or some sort of default operation. If you were trying to drive that sort of behaviour from Sitecore, I'd have to remodel it ever so slightly to dynamically get that information in. But the sort of command queue that we talked about, I'll just show you how that looks. So if we ask for help, and then let's say spin the wheel, let's actually see who wins the T round. Well, that went well, didn't it? Had someone. Let's get that mic. Then, in theory, we would start to see a build-up of this queue of information, and you can use that to go off and target different things and ask for and base stuff on previous calls. So those questions have context.
So based on the other question, I'm just thinking about, like, can you build a machine learning kind of thing where the other question gets recorded in Sitecore as a new config item, and then of course that becomes another option.
If we think of it a bit like MVC, this in a way is your controller that shouldn't really be doing too much work. I guess the view is kind of the speech input. The controller is this bit that then would defer off the actual logic to whatever that might be behind the scenes. Now, the easiest option is you build that logic into your skill, into the Lambda, but that could go off to Sitecore and start to consider things like workflow or interactions between items or links of things. It would take quite a lot of work to set up, and you might find there's easier ways to do it. So wouldn't necessarily be my go-to if I was trying to solve that problem, but it could definitely, you could definitely achieve it. As long as you understand where the different bits of information live, then where the rules run and where you evaluate that can be kind of anywhere from the database through to pretty much the C# code. So, yeah, it's up to you. Hopefully that answered it.
What happens on a Friday? That's a very different sort of response, isn't it? Yeah.
What happens on a Friday? Let's have a look. I can't imagine it's going to be particularly exciting, I'm afraid.
Alcohol-based.
That would be. I think it was a little more unoriginal than that. Oh, it's nearly the weekend. You can configure the team. What a bloody cop out, eh?
Did you try Alexa with like a variety of different accents and things? Like I know it can do English, but I've heard sort of varying stories about different regional accents.
No, I find at home sometimes it doesn't understand what I'm saying, but that's maybe my tone of voice. But
More broadly in Lambda, are you using it properly in production stuff now? Like for EasyJet, is that just test stuff or is that new stuff?
yeah, we use it in production a lot. Yeah, so for example, people's got secure access keys for AWS. So what we do is we reset them every 2 days, so that people, if they leave or wanted to do something rogue, they couldn't. We use it to reset all the security groups we've got in place. So if people do certain things, their bad changes will get unrolled the next day. So yeah, it's absolutely brilliant thing to have available. Just all those sort of maintenance tasks are so easy to do in it, and it's a few clicks to configure it and deploy it. And yeah, doesn't cost. It costs. I'll tell you what. Let's see how much all of this has cost for all of this demo. I think the biggest cost that I actually get is the fact that I've got 2 DNS entries. I know. And you can store shed loads of stuff in Dynamo, you can store millions of things in there, and you can run Lambdas millions of times, and 400,000 free gigabytes of it. Yeah, it's cheap as chips. Every single log message we fire off in EasyJet goes through a Lambda to adjust it and to add information in, and that doesn't seem to cost anything. That's gigs of stuff a day. So yeah, that'll be my sell on Lambdas.
surprised nobody asked what happened with the Azure portal. Do you know what happened?
Well, we raised a support ticket, and they mentioned that the Microsoft are on it. That was.
Yeah, so just for you to know that it's not Sitecore did something wrong, but Microsoft changed the CLI'S Azure compatibility level. By default, they raised the compatibility level, and so it's not only Sitecore but everyone else who is using different compatibility level for deployment. So the deck packs, they're running into the same issue. So right now, currently, nobody can really deploy anything to this CLI'S Azure. So that's happened. So it's Microsoft.
There's lots of angry phone calls to Microsoft.
I can imagine it. All right. Well, thanks.
Great, thanks very much. Right, should we do 10 minutes and then we'll do the next presentation? Is that long enough?